Michael Shaneyfelt on the Seeking Excellence podcast, the second ever Benedictine student to be here.
Yes, sir.
How's it going, homie?
It's going well. It's going well. Yeah, Grayson Dahl. He is an alpha. He's a stud. He's going to be doing some incredible things for our faith, and yeah, especially coming from Benedictine, what a incredible experience to be able to know him and be able to go out on the Great Commissioning with him. So
absolutely, yeah, he's a rock star, man. If you haven't listened to that episode, anyone out there, I highly encourage you to go back. I wish I had looked up the number that it is before this, but the episode of Grayson Dahl was just awesome. Released at the beginning of the summer, or actually I think it was the beginning of July. But yeah, great dude, and just awesome. So, but it's great to have you with me today, man. I'm excited to get to our conversation and just spend some time together. But first, I'd love to have you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, growing up, whatever you feel like we need to know to kind of set the stage of who is the now famous, from my understanding, Michael Shady.
No. So I'm from Southern California, just about an hour north of LA. It's a small town called Santa Paula. And yeah, beautiful place filled with orchards and, 15 minutes away from the beach. Absolutely gorgeous. Incredible communities out there, especially with the Catholic faith. And that was something that was really big for me. I had never heard of this out here, but our community would support each other in ways that I had never seen. So if someone was going through some sort of surgery, if someone was having a baby, any sort of big event within that family, all the other families would provide meals for them for months.
Wow.
Dinners. And so I grew up with, my mom making the dinner for, Betsy Sue down the street, who just had her 10th Catholic child. And and we were able to provide that dinner for them, and just seeing that Google Doc of just names, families upon families that were making dinner for them on a daily basis.
Wow.
That was just an incredible experience. And really brought a good understanding of that Benedictine hospitality, the seeing Christ as the person next to you, as your neighbor, as the parishioner that you are sitting with every single Sunday. So that was just an incredible experience growing up. And I'm number 6 of 7. So there's a good amount of us on the younger end. So I got, the psychological and the and the physical torment growing up, which was great.
That is good for you.
Very good for you. But the understanding of growing up in a big Catholic family was that it was monumental in my faith life, in every single little way that you could think of, growing up, in little personality aspects and mannerisms, and just watching my siblings grow up. It's been such a blessing because I'm able to see not only where they've done some incredible acts, but also where they've gone wrong too. And so I've been able to incorporate that within my life. But I went to a small high school, graduated with 18 in my class, called St. Augustine Academy. And we didn't have any sports, but I ended up choosing the school because of its incredible curriculum. It's a liberal arts Catholic high school. And so, reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, and really getting some solid writing, and having mass every Tuesday. And that was great to be a part of. But, having sports was a little difficult too, as you can imagine,
Sure. Yeah.
So I ended up, playing some club basketball for 4 years and got that discipline in, and then 2 years of adult rugby for our local city league. And I thought, that was just fundamental for me, which was sports. And I know that comes up on your podcast pretty often, which is the the virtue that is instilled in it, the transcendentals that are instilled within sports, the truth, the goodness, and the beauty, and how important that is.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
recognize how, the authority and the discipline and all of that within sports. And so I was just blessed to do that as well. So
Yeah, the teamwork, the risk. I mean, there's so much goodness that comes from that.
exactly. Yeah. It was a blessing for sure. But it definitely had its hard times in high school as well. As I didn't know why I was believing the faith, but I knew I needed to step toward it.
Mm.
And so there was this confusion on, should I jump toward it? And then this temptation of pulling back. So every single time that I would make a step forward, I was almost like I was taking 2 steps back because of, growing up in that another side culture within that beautiful community that we had in Santa Paula, and really getting immersed in the party aspect of going up and having a specific spot where all the boys would go and drink and all that stuff. And that was the pullback. That was getting me away from that relationship that I needed with Christ. And so it's about junior or senior year, things started clicking a little bit, but there was no sense of push to see Christ and to encounter him with all that I had. And so there was this tension of, should I jump or not? Should I jump off the cliff or not? And then I held back again. So I kept holding back and getting myself in more trouble, causing more issues for myself, depression, anxiety, all this stuff just skyrocketed. And as a teenager, that's a very confusing time. And so it caused a lot of stress and turmoil within my soul. And that, it stayed consistent. That same Michael stayed consistent all throughout the end of high school into freshman year of college. And that was a trip. And there's been a lot of healing from all of that, which has been such a grace. But there was one pivotal moment freshman year of being at Benedictine where he reached out to me, and it was almost like he's like, Mike, I'm done. like bro, I love you. Like open your dang heart. Like
stop being a clown.
Yeah, exactly. So
what was it that got you to Benedictine though in the first place?
So I'm number 4 of my family of going to Benedictine. So my sister Kathleen found it and was attracted to the community, the faith, and the scholarship, and the Benedictine roots and the Catholic faith and the liberal arts and the residential life. All of those 4 pillars just like pounding down into her and made her who she is. And she's a saint. She's incredible. And so I witnessed that. Then my brother Joe followed after, my brother John, and then myself. So I was able to really see how they changed in their spiritual life. And I knew exactly, at that same time that I needed to pursue that same thing. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so then you decide once you're there, you have this moment where Jesus is like, yo, stop being a fool. So what was the transformation like? How did it kind of go down?
Yeah. So it was an absolute fool for the longest time, up until Seek 2019 in Indianapolis. And it's really beautiful because since then I have encountered a lot of people who have had a lot of miraculous encounters with the Lord on that same day. I've met at least two or three other people who have had life-changing experiences or some sort of, St. Paul moment. And that was really inspiring to me, because then I realized that the Lord was really working that day. So got to that moment, and I was in a relationship, and I knew I wanted something more. I knew I wanted to be closer to Christ, but I didn't know how to get there. And so throughout the whole seek, focus, Indianapolis 2019, I kept experiencing hearing his word. Even though my heart was closed, I opened up a little bit and said a little prayer and said, Lord, like, I need you to guide me. And then he kind of just like swooped in, just as gentle as could be, and was so patient. And he said, you open yourself up to holiness, and continued with that. And that was like the whole message that week. And then it was the last night, and Sister Miriam Heidland of the SOLT, sisters, she gave a talk on the face of Christ. And that was sort of the reality for me. It was Christ had a face. Christ walked. Christ had hands. He had eyes. He spoke. He spat in the ground and brought, clay up and healed people's eyes. And that was a big draw in. And then there was a single moment when everything dropped, and a new kid, and I felt his presence. And it was just this jab of peace and zeal in my heart. And I leaned forward, mouth open, just saying, my Lord and my God, like, my God and my all, like, you are it. And that was the big bomb drop. And that took like a couple months for me to figure out that this call to holiness was something that was real, and it was something that I wanted, and it was something that I needed to pursue. So, a couple months go by, and I'm like praying with this, and there was just this beautiful openness to the priesthood, and felt as though there was this specific calling to that. And so I followed it. And that was kind of the big turning moment for me.
Dang. And then what was that discernment like? So like what were your first steps kind of once you started discerning the priesthood?
I started looking. I went online, sort of, when you get injured, you look up WebMD. I was like, I gotta
hit the Google.
I gotta start searching. I had to Google. And so I was like, man, what are my talents? I was like, what do I desire? And I was just super confused. I didn't know what I desired. I didn't know really any of that sort of ordeal in my spiritual life, in the interior life. So I just started looking up random orders. I looked up the Dominicans and the Franciscans, and those specifically were the two that kind of popped out to me. And then I ran across the Franciscan Friars renewal, and something kind of clicked. And so I reached out to them, and they're very impoverished.
I was gonna say, tell people, a lot of people don't know about that. I only know a little bit. So tell us a little bit about what their lifestyle is like. So, pretty extreme. The Navy SEALs of the priesthood.
Exactly. Just absolute alphas. They know what's going on.
For real.
So the Franciscan Friars renewal started in the 80s by a priest, Father Benedict Grishel, and a couple other friars as well. It's a sort of a start off of the Capuchins, the same order as St. Padre Pio. So there was this organization that started this movement, and then finally an order as it was accepted by the Vatican in New York City. And so they started in Harlem and the Bronx, and then kind of just blew up from there. And very, very humble, outgoing brothers that, they're funny, they're outgoing, they know how to talk. They know how to get you, going. And they were very, very attractive because of that. And then their main charism was toward the poor. So reaching out to all of the homeless within any general area of their friary. Going from apartments where there's a Bible study. One of them is ministering to a guy who lives in this tiny apartment, 1 bedroom, no kitchen apartment, and doing a Bible study, to another friar telling us to make sure we have our shoes on because we don't want to step in needles, crossing the bridge, to carrying a massive image of Our Lady of Guadalupe around the Hispanic culture and community, talking about Our Lady of Guadalupe and ministering that way, and going to hospitals where none of their family members are visiting them. Just the most impoverished life can get within those situations.
Right.
So I was able to encounter that, and that was just super attractive to me.
Yeah, that had to be wild, man. That had to be a wild experience. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I think it's so cool, that you had that openness, especially so soon. I think after you kind of had the conversion, that powerful experience, it's really great. I think, for me, I always have so much respect for people who had that kind of radical shift in their life. And obviously, I think we all continue to sit and struggle and things like that. But some definitely have more of a radical change. I know Emily talks about that with her struggles and stuff. Like, she had a pretty overnight healing, and a lot of her struggles and wounds and things like that. And mine was so slow. I was so slow. Bro, it took me so damn long. I feel like from 15 to 25, I was just constantly 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and obviously we all take it that way, but it is just really cool. Now. I can tell you that 3 months after what I considered my conversion in college, I was not Googling the Franciscans. You know what I mean? The Friars of renewal, bro. It was not in the cards. You know what I'm saying? I was not there for that. So yeah, I think it's beautiful to see that openness, man. But Seek is such a powerful thing. I had a beautiful time. I talk about my Seek experience, Seek 2015, because I'm an old head, so some of us old heads went to Nashville in 2015.
Oh yeah, let's go.
Yeah, and it was a great experience, man. I just had a beautiful time. So yeah, I'm excited for them to hopefully be able to do it in person this year, because it is such a beautiful thing in the church. But I love what you talk about with having that kind of heart transformation and conversion, and kind of the pooling of your heart before you had that kind of intellectual understanding, because part of my big thing with Seek in 2015, I think you'll find this interesting, is that whole year, bro, my senior year of college, I was really struggling with the true presence of the Eucharist. And it was crazy because by that point, I'm 4 years into my serious conversion. I'm in the chapel every day, praying holy hours most days, going to mass 4 or 5 times a week, leading Bible study, leading all these different things, right? Going on mission trips, right? Doing a whole bunch of stuff, and was kind of just a leader in the faith on campus. But it wasn't that if you would ask me if I believed in the true presence, my answer would have been yes. But I really just had the conviction of my head. I didn't have the conviction of my heart, and so it's so interesting how those two things can be so separate. And sometimes we have to lead with one or the other. Right. So there was times in my life when I followed my heart to Mount St. Mary's. I didn't have an intellectual plan as to why I would be going there, or how I would figure it out, you know what I mean? Or how God was going to change my life or transform me, or what role that was going to play in my life. Right. So you follow your heart at times, but then there's also times where you kind of did give the benefit of the doubt in your mind to the church, to God. Right. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, is it's so easy, if you only have one or the other, to blame the missing one for why you're not acting, right? For why you're not moving closer to God, why you're not doing the right thing. And it's funny because I mean, you and I both, we talked to a lot of people about where they're at in their relationship with God. And I'm thinking of a conversation I had recently with a friend of mine, and she's just really struggling, really kind of on the brink of joining the Catholic Church, but not really sure. But there's kind of these head check marks, right? Everything in the intellectual side, that's it's limitless, right? All of us, we all struggle with things. Emily and I were just walking on a hike this past weekend, and we were talking about the church, and we were talking about the abuse scandal, and I was just like really opening up to her about some of my struggles with even certain saints and leaders of the church today, and like how do we make sense of this, and just like some of the difficulty that I have with making sense of some of the things that have happened in our church over the last 30 to 60 years. And it's just really interesting. It is, yeah, it's a ton, right? And so, but you kind of realize, like, whether it's your heart or your head, like it's never perfect. That's the point of earth, right? Like that's the point of the fall, is that we're never fully convinced. You're never lacking fear. You're never lacking discomfort. And there's this lie that the devil has so successfully promoted that, like, at some point in your life, living your vocation will be easy, or living a Christ, following Christ will be easy, or being holy will be easy. It's always worth it. It's always joyful. It's always fulfilling. It always gives us more peace than the opposite, right? It's always more joyful than the opposite. It's always better than the opposite in living life without God. But there's just this lie, bro, that, you're going to be fully convinced. You're going to have full, confidence in everything that you decide as you strive to follow God. And when you watch things like The Chosen, I don't know if you watch The Chosen at all, but when you watch The Chosen, bro, like, you get to see them be like, what the fudge is going on? You know what I mean? They're like, what the hell are you doing? Yeah. Like, what do you mean real. You left everything? You know what I mean? They're like, are you crazy? You're out of your mind? And it's just like, yeah, that's what it looks like.
It's so real. It's so real. And we see that with the saints, where we can portray them as that, that holy card, where they have the halo over them and they're positioned perfectly. And, in movies as well, you see St. Francis as, a European model. Right. And it's like, that's not right. Like,
he looks like you in the movies.
No, bro, don't you even get me started. Don't you even. And that's portrayal. It's so false. And that's why I believe that The Chosen is such an incredible series, is that it brings out the realness. It brings out that holy face. It brings out the reality that Christ is. And from that, being incarnate, us, having bodies and be able to keep in touch with spirituality. That's so hard. It takes so much time, so much patience, and especially within discernment.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the saints, because I've ranted about that many a times in my life. And I don't remember the last time I talked about it on the podcast, but I think, I've often said that we have this mentality amongst a lot of different areas in life, where we look at somebody. I always, you hear this. It's kind of funny. Like, so the Olympics is a great example, right? Like, you see now we kind of are more honest about it. And you saw a lot of memes this year where it's like, my fat ass sitting there with a bag of chips and a beer open saying, this guy sucks. Like, this world-class athlete who doesn't stick his landing perfectly, And it's like, this dude sucks. And it's like, what? You could never do that, right?
Exactly.
But it's so funny. I used to complain because people like LeBron, or like even just friends of mine when I was in high school and college, were athletes. And it's like, oh, if I was that tall, I'd be a D1 basketball player too. And it's like, no, you wouldn't. I remember talking about this on the 9/11 podcast last year. That was the last time I talked about it. I was like, no, your fat ass wouldn't be LeBron James if you were 6'8", and had his athletic. You'd be lazy still. You're lazy now. Like, if you're not making the most of what you have now, there's no reason for you to rightly assume that if you had somebody else's situation, you do the right thing then. And you'd be choosing to seek excellence and be your best and strive to fulfill your potential with somebody else's circumstances. So it's so foolish, but we make the saints out to be these impossible figures, these figures who are impossible to emulate, so that we don't even have to try. Because it's easier to just be like, well, I could never be like St. Joseph. I can never be like St. Thomas More. I can never be like, Pier Giorgio Frassati. I can never be like whatever, you name it, right? Priests do it to St. John Vianney. Priests do it to St. Maximilian Kolbe. I can never be like them. So I don't have to try to be a saint. I don't have to try to be holy. I can just kind of be mediocre and just go to mass on Sunday, or not even do that, and just say my prayers before I eat or at nighttime, as I'm falling asleep. And it's like, dude, no, like, they're not. They try to tell us that as much as they freaking could, right? And the Bible highlights it as much as it can, that these people are so flawed and effed up that even you could strive to be like that.
They're constantly talking about how they're sinners, and it's embedded within the mass itself. Kyrie eleison, like, Lord have mercy. Like, I am a sinner. I am a sinner. I am a sinner. And then people are like, no, but you're a saint. And then it's like, no, I'm a sinner. And like this back and forth sort of system. And then kind of just have to realize that, yeah, like they were sinners and we are sinners. And so therefore it is possible for us to be saints. And what else is there? Like,
Right.
You have to thrive for that. And that mentality of that lukewarmness of it's not attainable is so tempting. And without the presence of God, that's going to continue to be tempting.
Absolutely. And the devil wants us to believe that in all of these different areas, right? And so instead of, just accepting that we're different from other people, this is the problem with comparison, right? Is that, we strive to emulate other people, but you don't compare yourself to them. So a great example that I always use is like, I would watch a lot of YouTube videos of basketball players when I was trying to improve my game, right? When I was trying to shoot better or score better and just like learning moves from LeBron or Derrick Rose or Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, right? And it's like, I don't compare myself exactly to them because I'm not them, right? I don't have their body. And that's true. But at the same time, I can still learn from what they did, implement that in my own way, in my own game. And that's how we have to look at the saints, right? That's how we have to look at any of our role models. Like, I know as a writer, I'm not going to be as good of a writer as Malcolm Gladwell or Jordan Peterson, right? Definitely not at 28. Maybe when I'm like 65, I might be like 60% at that level. But I'm like, I'm not going to be at that now. But does that mean I just don't write anymore? I'm not going to be as great of a podcaster as Ben Shapiro or, as great of a speaker as Father Mike Schmitz or as great of whatever. You can compare yourself to so many people, but it's like, well, I can listen to them and learn from them, take it and apply it to my life. But people get so easily discouraged. It's one of the biggest enemies of seeking excellence, I think, is just this discouragement to say, well, I can't, and not only just the discouragement of I can't, be like that person ever, but also this like microwave mentality that we have as a society that says, well, if I can't be a millionaire next year, I'm not going to invest today. If I can't be a saint, you know what I mean, walking on water tomorrow, then I'm not going to spend my 30 minutes in prayer today. If I can't be in the best shape of my life in 3 weeks, then I'm not going to go to the gym tomorrow.
Yeah. Instant gratification. It's that Amazon mindset. And there has to be patience in the silence, patience and love. Like those are things that are pivotal this day because there's so many distractions. We could go on a whole nother podcast about distractions and talk about negative attitudes about that. And the thing to focus on is that there are hermits way back when they would receive a word for a whole entire year, go back to their cell and pray with that word for a whole year, be in silence, receive the gifts that they have been given, and then go back to their abbot and say, Abbot, Holy Father, give me another word. And we need to go back to that mentality of patience and to listen and this zeal for that and to be on fire for that. But it takes examples. We have to pick and choose the incredible qualities that saints of past have had, and to pray with them and be in relationship with them and seek that purity, seek that strength, that courage from martyrs, from all those who have gone before us. We learn from history. And so why not dive deep into those who are now in union with God, being glorified and are within him and his heavenly power.
Absolutely. It's one of the things that I think is, I think a lot of college today is a scam and is a waste of a lot of people's money, especially when it comes to public colleges, because they literally just make you a worse person. And you're paying them to do it. And so to me, that's one hell of a racket, right? Like it's pretty wild. But I think one of the good things about it for most people is that it's one thing, and probably the last thing for a lot of people's lives, where they literally work at it for years and then finally get to accomplish it, right? That's why graduation is such a big deal. It's because like you study almost every day, right? Like you're working hard. Think of how much we celebrate people like doctors and lawyers because you have to go to school for so long. I have a friend who just became a dentist and she literally has been in higher education for a decade. Like I'm 28 years old. We graduated high school the same year. She just started working. Like she just got a full-time job. I'm like, how did you do that? I'm like, how do you stay in school that long? And medical doctors, especially when they specialize in things, surgeons. Oh my gosh, bro, they do it forever. They go to school
Yeah.
for like 15 years in higher ed.
And priests.
It's unbelievable. And so the
Yeah.
same thing with priests, right? Like you think about priests that go to college and they have 7 years of formation. And it's like the sad thing for a lot of people is that we lose that. And it's like, kind of, what's the next thing? And it's easy to kind of not have like a next adventure, a next like battle to fight, a next kind of thing. But when you understand that what you're trying to do with your life is you're trying to build something, right? It's like it's like building a massive building or something like that, or like a sculptor, right? Like it takes a long period of time to see the results that you want to see. It's just part of the game. And ultimately, you're starting a journey that you know is impossible to win, or is impossible to finish and get to where you're actually going to be fully, wholly satisfied on this side of heaven. It's impossible, right? Like the Lord Jesus literally tells us to be perfect as the Heavenly Father is perfect, and we strive for that. And it's the biggest, one of the biggest enemies of seeking excellence, I think, is just quitters, right? Like you have a quitting mentality. It's like it gets difficult, or you're investing money and you lose money, or you're working out. I remember I was getting back into shape in going into December. I gained weight over the holidays, and I tore my Achilles in January. And it's like, then I got hell out of shape. Right now I'm in the worst shape of my life coming out of the boot in May. And it's like, now I gotta do this shit all over again. You know what I'm saying? And so you're constantly doing this and falling and struggling. And same thing with my spiritual life. I struggled. I had a great spiritual life in college, and finally got up and I was crushing it. Then I went to Ranger School, huge setback for 12 weeks in Ranger School. I remember I got to receive communion once on a Tuesday in a gym. And it was because I like kind of snuck out and wrote a letter to the local parish, and it was a whole thing, but it was the only time I got to receive communion, right?
Goodness, bro.
And so I come out of that and I'm a hot mess. Then I kind of get my life together again. Then I deploy to Afghanistan. Then I come back, I'm a hot mess again. Takes me like a year to kind of finally bounce back and get my spiritual life right. And so it's all these different challenges, right? And it's every time, it's like I said, that 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. You strive, you fail. It takes a long time to build. And that's what I feel like, bro, people don't understand and don't want to really commit themselves to. When we look at these Olympic athletes, or when you look at somebody like, when you see Giannis win a championship this year, everybody loves it because he's been in the league for like 8 years, right? He won the MVP years ago. And so he's been, championship caliber. All the haters, all the people saying, he really blew it this year. He's a bust, all this stuff. Like, it's awesome to see somebody work 8 years and to think that's 8 years in the league, 7 years in the league, not even counting back to he probably started playing basketball when he was 5, right? All with the end goal of doing this. When you see somebody work for 20 years to accomplish something, like, it's an amazing thing, man. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I share. And this reminds me of our conversation pre-podcast of, this, even like thinking about the ability, like ranting ability, right? Rantability, if you will. I've often told this story of Picasso. You might have heard this or whatever. It's in a lot of books. But Picasso was in like some diner in Europe and or cafe or whatever, and he was like doodling on a napkin, right, for like an hour. And this lady, he's like going to throw it away with like his food, and this lady's like, "What are you doing? Wait a minute, like, I want that. Like, can I buy that from you?" And he's like, "Okay, it'll be $50,000." And she's like, "Dude, that took you like 30 minutes to draw. What do you mean it'll be 50 grand?" And he's like, No. This took me 50 years to draw." Because he's like, the only reason I could draw this in 30 minutes is because I've been drawing my whole effing life. Like, you don't get it, And that's
the process. Yeah,
exactly, bro. And so that's what I think a lot of times, like, people will mock me or make fun of me for like procrastinating. Like we were talking about homie Grayson for like writing a talk last minute or whatever. And I'm like, dude, I've read hundreds of books in the last 5 years. The amount of time spent in prayer, the amount of time spent listening to podcasts, the amount of time spent in the classroom of silence, in the classroom of the weight room, and, terrible physical punishments in Ranger School and all these different things. I'm like, this isn't me just spending 20 minutes on this talk. Like, there's been years on this. And you see people who don't do that personal development, who don't do the personal growth. Now, there's people who are planners that are awesome and work really hard too. I'm not saying that everybody who wants to plan and prepare is not growing themselves, but right. I do know a lot of people who don't do those things when they have to say something in front of people, don't know what the hell to say, and they're nervous or whatever, and they're just like, well, I just wish I had your ability to just speak. And it's like, No, you wish you had done all the reading and listening and studying and
Exactly.
hard work, right? That I had done.
Exactly.
That's what you
And
wish.
yeah, exactly. Just that temptation of going back to this lukewarm desire. And going back to discernment, bro, like that right there is the issue. Is
Right.
You talked about it with Grayson, like you want that St. Paul moment to happen and for the Lord to reach down and say, hey, I want you to do this. And that's not going to happen. You know, very, very small chance that the Lord is going to reach out to you and say,
Knock you
join
off
the
your horse.
priesthood. He's not going to write you a letter, you know, and see that you have to first encounter him. You can't just be wandering in the desert, you know, mindlessly and sinning and not have your spiritual life up or anything like that and expect the Lord to be able to write you that letter. That letter is going to be written as you're talking to him, and you're going to be able to hear that and receive that as you encounter Christ. And that is the very first thing you have to do in all of discernment. And so that was the big thing for me, which was I thought that was going to happen. So I spent, you know, a good year of expecting the Lord to reach down and say, hey, Mike, this is where you need to go. Here's the path. I want you to join seminary right now. But he didn't. So I felt almost lukewarm. I felt as though I was in this limbo experience. And the number one thing I didn't do was encounter him. And that is the very first thing that you have to do is be in that relationship and consistency and be disciplined and, you know, offer from the rising of the sun to its setting, offer sacrifices to him throughout the day and have that daily practice of prayer in the morning and at night. And it's pivotal.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's intimidating or that really we get wrong as human beings, as we think about these things, right? We think about these challenges we have to face or the hard work we have to do. One of our problems is that we have this just deep sense of pride that like it ought not be that way for us. Like it shouldn't have to be that hard, right? And it's like what will change your life when it comes to wanting to strive for excellence in all these different areas and to follow God more faithfully and to do the hard work that it takes to be great and fulfill your potential in all these different areas in life. And caveat, when I say be great, I don't mean like in a prideful, you know what I mean, like super successful, flashy way. Right. But like greatness to me is holiness, is virtue, is being success. I think we can use those same terms and just mean them in the right their right definition, right? But we talk about great saints a lot. But one of the things that'll change is a huge shift and was a huge shift for me is to realize that not only do I deserve to struggle, you know, and deserve to have to work hard, but I deserve for it to be a lot worse than it is.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And like when you have that humility finally to be like, man, I just suck without God. Like, I'm just really not good. I'm just really not good at this life, man. And like without him, I'm just a mess. And it's like every time I try to do it on my own, I just ruin everything. And it's like when you can finally stop to realize that and you think about the fall and you stop blaming Adam and Eve for the same thing that you would have done had you been in their circumstances, right? And like realize that like our sin also like put Jesus on the cross. It's like you deserve hell and misery now and forever. You don't deserve the anything that we get to experience. Even just doing this with you right now, like we don't deserve to have this conversation. We don't deserve to have our friendship, right? Like
not one bit.
Exactly. It's like when you can start to recognize that and just be truly grateful for all that you have, and realize that God wants you to work hard and He wants you to be a laborer in the harvest, and you can be honored to be a part of that. You know, it kind of reminds me, there's this awesome family here that the Harpoles love, the Urban family, and they were just absolutely amazing. And they played this like funny joke. There's 8 kids, and we were talking to the 2 oldest girls, and they were talking about how the next 2 are boys that are 10 and 12. They convinced the 7 and 5-year-old girls that like working is like an honor, right? They're like getting to clean the house and do chores is like it's a privilege that you could lose, right? And so the girls are like super excited to clean with them. They're pumped to go do their chores. and it's all these things. But when you can start to like allow yourself to be formed in that way, long term, like God willing, they'd never lose that, right? To recognize that service is actually a privilege and as a blessing and sanctifies you and benefits you, that St. Francis wasn't lying when he says it's better to give than to receive. Like, that's not a joke, like, I mean, that's,
No doubt.
they kind of deceived them into believing this, but like, if you think about it, like, that's literally our lives. Like, that's literally, it's actually true.
Yeah. And the deeper that we dive into that, the more we're going to realize that. We're going to realize how much of a sinner that we are. There's something that the Franciscan Friars of Renewal say. They say that the majority of lessons that they learn are from those that they encounter in the streets. And so that is, they learn all about themselves when they're in the streets and talking to these impoverished people, because then it's that realization of how impoverished they are. And so you're just full on diving, full submersion. You always think that you are the one that is the mighty, the giver. But really in that introspective desire, there's going to be the openness that God is going to create of a impoverished soul. And to be able to recognize that is so important. And that was the big thing for me within discernment, which discerned for 2.5 years, almost 3 years. And it, like, every single time I dove deeper into Christ's Sacred Heart, there was more of an emphasis on the amount of sin and guilt and a realization of healing that I needed. The deeper that I went, and to be able to experience that is such a blessing. And it really comes down to trusting God, and that is key for discernment, because you have to be able to open yourself up, and to open yourself up, you first have to receive this healing and this humility, this deep humility, as pride is the first sin and the greatest of them, and humility combating that, Our Lady and the devil trying to impede, most importantly, like you had just mentioned, on pride. And so to trust God and to open yourself up in that aspect is so good. And then with that trust, it takes so much time. And I thought it was going to take a month. I was like, I'm leaving college, I'm going to seminary, bada bing, bada boom, I'm out of there. And that was not it. It took so much time for me to realize where my desires were and encountering Christ. And it's crazy because, this whole 2.5 year experience, I'm thinking that I'm full blown for the seminary. And it's like gung ho, like, Lord Jesus, I'm going to become your priest. Like, I want to join the men of Melchizedek. Like, get me in there. Like, let's roll. And then through opening myself and through this trust, doors started opening and others started closing. And next thing you know, now I'm in a relationship and I'm just in the clouds. Like, it's crazy how the Lord has so much for you that you don't know about. And eventually he's going to bring that into realization once you open yourself up and once you're able to receive that letter from him. So.
Absolutely. No, 100%. One thing I want to go back to first, and then I'm going to come back to what you just talked about. It's a beautiful story, man. And love, obviously, everything that's happened for you, and I've been praying for you throughout the last 6 months of discernment and everything. So it's been awesome getting to be take a courtside seat to the game that is your life.
Yes, sir.
It has been a blessing for sure. But I think just going back to what we talked about with this deserving of challenge, and you gave me this idea to think about, like, who recognized the beauty in suffering, but also like our undeservingness to suffer with Christ, while also like finding it an honor, was like St. Peter, right? So like being crucified, they're like, we're gonna crucify you like Jesus, and he's like, dude, you got to do it upside down. He's like, I don't deserve to die the same way as him. Like, that's some gangster stuff, you know what I mean? Like, think about,
that's some alpha stuff right there, bro.
Yeah, you know what I mean? That's some first Pope legendary stuff right there. it's nuts, man. And to think like he's like, yeah, it's an honor to suffer with Christ, but I don't deserve to suffer the same way he did. Like that's some baller stuff for sure.
I
But
know.
I think the other thing that you made me think about in there was just thinking about the guilt that we get to experience in a positive way, which can happen. And I think about like, what is it? We've heard so much, of like past generations talking about Catholic guilt and how negative it was. And I think that guilt without formation is a really bad thing, right?
Ooh,
When
yeah,
you don't
no doubt.
understand it. Yeah, like when you have guilt, right, without the hope of salvation and without the virtue of humility, it's miserable, right? Like if you don't understand that mercy, redemption is possible and like truly believe that, and you don't have the humility to be like, yeah, I am guilty and like I want to repent and I want to be different and I don't want to do that again, right? For genuine things. Now, was there guilt for like silly things? Yes. But when people talk about like Catholic guilt for going to mass on Sunday, it's like, yeah, you should, like, you quite literally are guilty of
Yes.
something
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
don't go to mass on Sunday.
Justice, baby.
Then you're guilty
Yeah.
of a sin. So feeling guilty when you are guilty seems justified, right? Like just like
Right.
feeling wet when you are wet seems justified, just kind of is, right? Like it's not really good or bad. It's just, I mean, it can be good. And the way you interpret it can be bad, I suppose, but it's like that is meant to be there. And I was recording with a Father Casey, a priest, earlier today, a different podcast, and we were talking about like how we just kind of have a world with no shame now. You know what I mean? And we have this kind of like wanting to reject anything that does make us uncomfortable or guilty or ashamed, or you know what I mean? And it's like, no, like the reason why pornography was able to rise with the same rise of the nuns, like NONES, no affiliation in religious life, and
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and the religious in religion, and the decrease in church attendance is because we've created this like world of no shame, right? Like, and you see it every day. Like, I mean, to the point of like pedophilia in news articles. They're like, you shouldn't be ashamed of this. Like, let's make it normal. Let's make polygamy normal. Let's make adultery or multiple sexual partners normal. Let's normalize transgenderism. Let's normalize same-sex marriage. Let's normalize all of these things. And it's like there's not supposed to be any shame. And people think that that's going to lead them to a life of happiness and joy because there's no more guilt. If there's nothing to be ashamed about, then you don't have to feel guilty. But it's obvious, we ignore philosophy and like natural law and reason,
Right.
and realize
Right.
that like a sin is just an act against reason. Our boy Austin, the basic Catholic, said that the other day on the podcast, that
Yeah.
sin is an act against reason. And it's like, it leads you to be miserable. Like a life of sin is not good, it turns out, right? Like we also see this coupling of all of those things and a crazy increase in suicide, in depression, in anxiety, in all of these mental health challenges, right? People are miserable. Life is easier than it's ever been, and people are more miserable than they've ever been. And it's like, at what point? I mean, and most of us in the church world, like, we're obviously actively trying to save people from that, but there's also times where you just kind of sit back and watch, and you're just like, I wonder when, like, how far will they need to go? Like, how miserable do you have to make yourself?
And sometimes that's all you can do, is because they're
Yeah.
not accepting silence. And like it's constant, listen to music before you go to bed, listen to music up until then, listen to music all throughout the day, busying your time, trying to call people.
There's for days.
You do not want to you don't want to have that quiet time, because there's that reflection of self. And then you start feeling guilty, and then it's like, okay, yep, this guilt does not feel good, and and so I'm just gonna push that away. A little instant gratification, like that. Yeah, that's it. Is the devil is really, he's planting that seed, no doubt.
Drugs, distraction, addiction, like all those things, man. Short-term pleasures, and it's really sad to see people just divulge themselves in that, because you're like, dude, it doesn't have to be that way, And I've been guilty of that, and have really been reflecting in my own life of trying to force myself to have more silence, because I can get really bad at that too. And I think that's one of the dangers of like the seeking excellence philosophy, bro, is that, like I was just talking about earlier, of reading and podcasts and all this stuff, right? It's like, well, I like listening to Ben Shapiro in the background while I'm doing like mindless work, right? Or if I have a break and I'm doing something like, or I'm going on a walk, like I want to be listening to a podcast or an audiobook or whatever. And it's like, you get to a point where you're like, man, I just need to take this drive with no music. I did
Right.
it the other night.
Right.
It was kind of crazy because I was like, I wonder when the last time I literally heard my car's engine was. You know what I mean? I was like, I'm such an idiot. I'm like, when was the last time I literally just like windows down, like could hear my car, like and hear what it sounded like?
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, it's really
Which good will you
wild.
choose?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know what I
There has
mean?
to be a realization of this guilt, because there has to be a realization of sin. And if that's what, Austin was going on about, but that realization of hell, like,
Yeah,
just the other day was the gospel passage of the road is narrow. Like,
yep,
it is not going to be easy. And it's very easy to say, I'm good here. Like, let's just stay on this path. Because once you start strolling and you're saying, I'm good, like, we're good right here, that's when you start going downhill. You have to have that versatile alto mindset, like going up to the heights at all times, or else if you're just on this grind of like, my job's good and relationship's good and I just did the dishes, whoa, let's go. Like,
yeah,
stuff like that. It's like, no, like, don't stop there, like,
yeah.
sweep the floor, bro. Like, like, keep going up.
Exactly. And that's a lot of times where I think that like Mamba mentality, right? Like the athlete mentality can be so good because it's like, just like, let's just see, like keep winning. You know what I mean? Like keep just taking the right next step, doing the right next action, and great things add up and multiply. You know what I mean? And it's exponential. Your growth is exponential, and it's just worth all the sacrifices. And so, yeah, man, kind of bringing it back to your story, I think it's beautiful to see, after all your times of kind of wrestling with what is God calling you to do and kind of seeing where you're at now, is a beautiful thing, obviously. But really cool just to see, that like discernment can take you on a wild ride, and the Lord, I think, has different plans for each of us in our discernment periods of time of discerning different decisions and things like that. And I think that's one of the keys that we learn from the Catholic life, and that silence can really teach you, is like always asking the Lord, like, what am I supposed to learn in this time? Even when it's difficult, right? Even when I tore my Achilles, even when you're in Afghanistan, even when you're, moving or you're on vacation or whatever, it's like, Lord, what am I supposed to learn during this
Right.
season of my life, right? During this little chapter, even just this page of the book of my life.
Right.
What's the lesson here? What am I supposed to gather from this?
Yeah, exactly. Taking the little things into account and pulling in humility with that. Before this big switch from like discerning priesthood into a dating relationship, there was a moment of this. There's a deep moment of humility in my life where I was down in Laguna Beach with my little sister and our buddy Coley, and we ended up getting caught around some rocks as high tide came out in a matter of seconds, which I had never seen before growing up in California, which was high tide rising within a minute or two up to,
Wow.
5 feet. And so we couldn't really get off this rock. And so we ended up jumping off, which was the only way to go, and surrounded by these rocks. And there's a rip tide coming in. My buddy Coley ended up saving my sister and from her from dying. And I was very close to being smashed up against some rocks too. We looked on the news the next day, and apparently 6 months prior, there was a man that had died right in that same spot that we were at from a high tide, from the same situation. So all three of us were just absolutely humbled from that. Now, the next day, I'm out fishing, commercial fishing with my pops, and we're out next to these beautiful islands, the Santa Cruz Islands, and we're going and dropping our lines, and we have about 5 minutes left. We had just caught some great fish and are pumped for the dinner for the night, as you can imagine, bro. And both my lines break. So my dad's like, hey, like take my line. You keep going. You've been catching the majority of the fish. Like, this is for you. And I was like, Dad, like, don't stop it, So
You're
I was
blushing.
like, stop it. And then I took the pole, I was like, yeah, all right. And so I dropped my line and instantly get a snag with 5 minutes left. And I'm reeling the fish up, and was about to dislodge the hook, and the sailor's aide came over and was running to me and said, he was like, "Hey, let go of the damn fish." And I like, let go of the fish. And he comes over with some gloves and pulls the hook out and starts cutting the bottom of its gill. And I was kind of confused. And he said, "Son, you just grabbed one of the most venomous fish in the world. You would have died if you would have grabbed that thing by the spine on the bottom." And it's crazy for me to think now, before, where the fish was spinning on the line before I grabbed it, and it wasn't that big of a fish. So it was called a scorpion fish, same family as the rockfish, and just very, very venomous. And so it's spinning on the line, just quite literally Russian roulette. And I grabbed the thing, and my fingers were literally centimeters away from the spine in which it would have injected into me. And we're an hour and a half offshore. I'm already allergic to bees and all that stuff. I have like EpiPens on me. I would have been gone. So that's back-to-back days where I was close to death.
What?
And I encountered this deep, like, humility of, my life is not in my hands.
Right.
And to think of all of the sins and think, my first thought was, bro, I need to get to confession before the next day happens. Like, Lord, if you have something in store for me tomorrow, like,
right. Yeah.
like,
I need a day.
Let me get to confession first. Like, I think that's what you're saying. And so I was kind of just like, had this mentality of like preparing for death at all times. Right. And so now it's such a reality to me that there's like this sense of urgency to get closer to our Lord, instead of blocking things away. And that was given to me. And I thank God for those experiences, because now I'm able to humbly recognize what's going on and his constant presence in my life.
It's awesome, man. That's a crazy, crazy time. Definitely don't die today. Whatever you do.
No promises, bro. No promises.
Yeah, we need you tomorrow, so don't die today. That's amazing. Well, bro, this has been awesome. I think thank you for sharing so much of your life, man. It's been beautiful hearing your journey and just how the Lord's kind of, led you through so many ups and downs, crazy, twists and turns and things like that. What I have, my last question is just like, what's it like? The Friars want you now. The Culture Project wants you. What's it like to just have like a D1 prospect? All these organizations are coming and want you. You still got a whole year left. So what's it like? What's it like being pursued by all these different organizations?
Oh man, it's very humbling, bro. It's very humbling. I'm looking around, being like, man, it's a beautiful thing, and I am just so honored to be pursued and to see the goodness in that. But at the same time, recognizing there's this beautiful quote that says, recognize the wise for their wisdom and gain things from that, gain that wisdom from them, but also recognize that they're also dust. And so having like that constant recognition of being pursued and seeing that as a gift, and seeing all of life as a gift. And so you're able to gift itself. And then seeing the Father in that same sort of reciprocal of we are gifts to him, and his beauty and his light shining upon us at all times. So
that's baller. Well, I think I shared with you this before. I can't remember if I have or not, but one of my low-key dreams is, I know you're big into videography and things like that. I want you to be on the SE team next year when you leave BC. So keep that in mind, that there's a third one. There's a third organization out there hunting you down that's got its eyes on you for sure. So so don't forget that. Don't forget the homies over here at Seeking Excellence. But want to thank you, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to jump on the podcast with me today. It's definitely been a blessing to my life, and I'm sure to many listeners out there as well.
Thank you, Nathan. It was an honor.